Welcome back. Today we're jumping into a really tricky legal puzzle, one that makes you question what it even means to be a person. It's all about the unborn person, and trust me, it's a fascinating paradox.
So let's just get right to it with the big question. According to the law, when do you actually become a person? Now, hold on. We're not talking about religion or science here. This is purely a legal question. And you're going to see the law's answer is kind of surprising and way more flexible than you might think.
All right, so to really get our heads around this, we have to start here. Can someone be considered a person before they're even born? It sounds like a philosophical debate, right? But this was the absolute core of a very real, very human story that went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Let me tell you about Carmen Quimiguing. She was a young student and she found herself in an incredibly difficult situation. She alleged that a married man, Felix Icao, forced himself on her, and she became pregnant. So this wasn't just some abstract legal case, it was a young woman trying to get accountability and, just as importantly, support for the child she was carrying.
Now, when Carmen sued for support for her unborn child, you'd think that would be straightforward, right? Well, the first court actually threw the case out. Their logic was basically, hey, the child isn't born yet, so it can't have rights. It seemed like a dead end for her. But that dismissal is what ended up paving the way for a truly landmark Supreme Court decision.
So the Supreme Court pulled out this really powerful idea from the Civil Code called provisional personality. Okay, think of it like this. The law essentially reserves a seat on an airplane for a conceived child. That seat is held for them, giving them this temporary legal status for anything and everything that's actually good for them. Like, you guessed it, the right to be supported.
And the court did not mince words. They said, and I'm quoting here, "The unborn child, therefore, has a right to support from its progenitors, even if the said child is only en ventre de sa mère," which is just a fancy way of saying in its mother's womb. I mean, wow, that was a huge deal. It was a clear declaration that an unborn child has rights that can be enforced in court. And this right to support isn't just some random one-off thing. The law gives other protections too. For example, an unborn child can legally be given donations. They can also be considered a forced heir, which basically means you can't just write them out of your will. You see the pattern? The law is consistently stepping in to protect their potential future.
But, and this is a big but, this is where the paradox really kicks in. To get the full picture of this provisional personality, we have to look at a completely different and honestly tragic case that pushed this whole idea right to its breaking point.
So now let's talk about Oscar Lazo. His wife, Nita Villanueva, had already had 2 abortions with the same doctor, but then she had a third one, and this time Oscar didn't know about it and hadn't consented. So he sued the doctor for damages.
And this brought a whole new question to the court. Can a parent sue for damages because of the death of an unborn fetus? I mean, it seems logical, right? If an unborn child has a right to support, surely they have some right to life that you can get compensation for. Well, the legal answer is way more complicated than you think.
Okay, looking at these 2 cases side by side really shows you the legal tightrope we're on. In the first case, Quimiguing, the claim for support was favorable to the unborn child, so the court said yes. But in the second case, Glues, the claim was for damages because the fetus died. And here the court said no. Why? Because the fetus never acquired a full, complete legal personality. How can that be?
And here it is, the absolute key to this whole thing. That personality is called provisional for a reason. It's conditional. All those rights, support, donations, inheritance, they're all just pending, waiting on one single critical event. The child has to be born alive. Since the fetus in Magaloo's case wasn't born alive, its provisional personality basically vanished, and with it, any legal claim for its death. So once you grasp that distinction, it opens up a much bigger idea. You see, the whole concept of a person might feel like a biological fact, but in the world of law, it's something called a legal fiction. It's a concept the law invents to solve problems.
And if you think that's a bit out there, get this. In another case, the Supreme Court said that the estate of a dead person is, legally speaking, a person. Why on earth would they do that? Simple. The law needed a way to handle all the assets and debts left behind, so it just created a legal person where a real one didn't exist anymore, just to make things work.
So you can see the law has these different buckets for what it calls a person. You've got natural persons, that's you and me. You've got the conceived child with that special provisional status, and then you have artificial persons, like a company or the estate of someone who's passed on. Each one is just a tool the law uses to assign rights and responsibilities.
And the whole shebang ties into this concept called legal status. To put it simply, your legal status is just what you can and can't do in the eyes of the law. It's the thing that gives a corporation the right to own a building, or an unborn child the right to get support. It all flows from this idea of legal personality.
Okay, so we've waded through some pretty deep legal waters here. Let's pull back for a second and ask the most important question. Why does any of this actually matter to us?
Well, here's the big takeaway. Legal personality isn't a fact of nature. It's a foundational legal fiction. It's an incredibly powerful and creative tool that the law uses to solve messy, complicated human problems, whether that's granting rights to an unborn child or imposing duties on a corporation.
And that's the thought I want to leave you with. If the law can literally invent the definition of a person to meet its own needs, what other basic ideas in our lives, things like marriage or property or even citizenship, are also shaped by these legal definitions that we almost never stop to think about?